The waiter humiliated an elderly black man by pouring soup on him and mocking his clothes. He didn't know the man was a billionaire, capable of turning his life upside down. What happened next will surprise even the most skeptical. But let's start at the very beginning. The Maison Deluxe restaurant was packed. Friday night had brought in wealthy and influential clients. The hall sparkled with crystal chandeliers, and waiters bustled between tables carrying dishes under silver lids. Henry Matthews, an elderly black man, entered slowly but confidently. His tweed jacket was neatly buttoned, and his shoes, though old, were polished to a shine. Henry sat at a window table and smiled as he politely asked a young waiter named Andrew for the menu. Andrew cast a disdainful glance at Henry. His crisp white shirt and black apron underscored the importance of his role here, serving the elite. "Excuse me, sir, but are you sure you can afford to dine here?" he asked with fake politeness. "I just want to have dinner. Is that a problem?" Henry replied calmly, maintaining his dignity. Andrew shrugged. "As you wish," he said with a mocking chuckle and left. In the kitchen, he loudly gossiped with his colleagues. "That old man clearly walked into the wrong place. Look at him. Thinks he can sit with our regulars." Returning with a soup tureen, Andrew deliberately slowed down near Henry's table. Suddenly, he pretended to stumble, and hot soup splashed onto the elderly man's jacket. "Oops, how clumsy of me," Andrew smirked. Then again, maybe it's for the best. Those old rags weren't worth much anyway. The room froze for a moment. Nearby guests turned to look. Someone gasped quietly. Henry stood up slowly, showing neither anger nor embarrassment. He calmly dabbed at his sleeves with a napkin and looked at the waiter. "Accidents happen, young man. What matters is how we handle them afterward." With those words, Henry headed to the restroom. Meanwhile, at a nearby table, journalist Sarah Hanley recorded the incident on her phone and whispered to her friend, "Did you see that? He did it on purpose." "That guy doesn't know who he's dealing with," her friend replied. Sarah thoughtfully looked at her phone screen, where the footage of Andrew spilling the soup and smirking was already ready to go. She hit send. The video was uploaded to the internet. The evening was far from over, and for Andrew, this incident would become a lesson he would never forget. Henry returned from the restroom wearing a clean shirt, which he had pulled from a small leather bag. Despite the humiliation, he remained calm and dignified, which irritated Andrew even more. Watching the elderly man return, Andrew couldn't resist mocking him again, muttering to a colleague, "Look at that, he even carries a spare shirt. What's next? A homeless survival kit?" Sarah Hanley, sitting nearby, kept her eyes on Henry. As a journalist, she had a keen sense for injustice, and the scene unfolding at the next table struck her deeply. She had already uploaded the video to social media with the caption, "When a waiter thinks he can get away with anything, humiliation won't go unnoticed." The video went viral within minutes. Waiters and guests began whispering and glancing at their phones. "What's all this noise about?" asked David Lawrence, the restaurant owner, who had just returned from his office. One staff member, hiding his phone behind his back, muttered, "Looks like someone posted a video from our dining hall. Thousands of views already." David, looking grim, quickly approached Andrew, who was still serving orders with a smug expression. "Andrew, in my office, now." "For what?" Andrew tried to joke, but David was already glaring at him. Meanwhile, Henry politely asked for the check. Andrew walked to his table with an exaggerated smile. "Everything okay, sir? Perhaps you'd like something else?" Sarah couldn't hold back and said loudly, "Why don't you apologize? Or do you think no one filmed the video that's already spreading online?" Andrew froze, his face pale. "What video?" "The one where you humiliate a customer by pouring soup on him." A man from another table chimed in, showing his phone. "You're famous now, buddy. Expect some visitors." The restaurant fell into an awkward silence. David, realizing the situation was spiraling out of control, approached Henry. "Sir, please accept my deepest apologies. Your meal is on the house." Henry nodded. "Apology accepted. but I'm not the only one who needs to hear it. He glanced at Andrew. I believe in giving people second chances. The question is how they use them. Henry's words echoed through the room. Guests began whispering again. Andrew said nothing, his face red with shame. He didn't yet know that the consequences of his actions would extend far beyond the restaurant. Meanwhile, Sarah Hanley updated her post with a new caption. Never judge a book by its cover. Stay tuned. The story is just beginning. By the time the restaurant closed, the video had been viewed tens of thousands of times, and David's phone was ringing off the hook. Andrew realized his career was hanging by a thread, but still couldn't fathom what awaited him next. That night was just the beginning. The next morning, the Maison de Luxe restaurant woke up to the center of a scandal. The video of Andrew spilling soup on an elderly man and humiliating him had already garnered 1 million views. Social media buzzed with comments. People demanded the waiter's dismissal and a boycott of the restaurant. David Lawrence, the owner of the establishment, called the entire staff for a meeting. Andrew sat in the corner, trying to appear unfazed, but his hands trembled. This is a catastrophe, David roared. Our reputation has been destroyed overnight because of your behavior, Andrew. Do you even understand what you've done? It was just an old man, Andrew muttered, but his voice was quickly drowned out by the murmurs of furious staff. An old man? David slammed his fist on the table. Do you even know who he is? At that moment, the door opened and Henry Matthews entered, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit. Andrew froze, his eyes widening in disbelief. Behind Henry were his assistants and lawyers. Allow me to properly introduce myself, Henry began, his voice firm and calm. Henry Matthews, founder of M Group Capital and one of this city's biggest investors. I'm not here for a scandal. I'm here to offer a solution. David looked stunned. Mr. Matthews, on behalf of the restaurant, Henry raised his hand, stopping him mid-sentence. I'm not interested in apologies. I want this young man to learn to respect people, regardless of their appearance. Andrew sank into his chair, his face burning with shame. Henry continued. Here's my proposal. Instead of being fired, Andrew will spend a month volunteering at my charitable foundation. He'll help in soup kitchens for the homeless and care for the elderly. Let him see the world through the eyes of those he's so quick to judge. What? Andrew stammered, unable to believe his ears. Or you can be fired, Henry added calmly. David turned to the waiter. Your choice, Andrew. There's no third option. Reluctantly, Andrew nodded, mumbling, I'll do it. Excellent, Henry concluded, walking toward the door. He stopped and turned back. Remember, appearances can be deceiving, but a person's true character is revealed through their actions. After Henry left, the room fell into a heavy silence. Andrew was stunned. He didn't know what to expect, but he already sensed that this would be the most difficult challenge of his life. A video of the new encounter with Henry was already gaining traction. News headlines boomed. Billionaire teaches a lesson to disrespectful waiter. But for Andrew, this was just the beginning of his journey to reevaluate his values. The first week of volunteering at Henry Matthews Foundation was a real shock for Andrew. Instead of the gleaming restaurant with its luxurious dishes, he found himself in the kitchen of a soup kitchen for the homeless. The hum of voices, the smell of cheap food, and long lines of people in worn-out clothes were nothing like what he was used to. Hey, rookie, stop standing there. Start ladling the soup, barked an elderly cook, handing him a ladle. Andrew reluctantly got to work. People passed by, each offering a silent look of gratitude or a quiet, thank you. At one point, a man in a tattered coat stood before him. Andrew froze. He recognized familiar features in his face. You okay, kid? The man asked. You look like my father, Andrew mumbled, pouring soup into the bowl. For the first time in years, guilt gripped his chest. He remembered how his father had lost his job, and how his family had teetered on the edge of poverty. Back then, they too had visited soup kitchens, and he had been ashamed of it. In the second week, Andrew was sent to help at a retirement home, where he cared for elderly residents. For the first time, He realized how difficult life was for seniors, not just physically, but emotionally too. "May I help you?" he asked softly when an elderly woman struggled to reach for a glass of water. "Thank you, dear. You know, little things like this mean so much to us," she replied with a smile that touched Andrew to the core. Each day, he saw the faces of those he had once judged, the poor, the elderly, people with different stories, and each time he marveled at their dignity and gratitude. Gradually, he began to understand how narrow and arrogant his view of the world had been. By the third week, Andrew had a personal meeting with Henry Matthews. Henry was waiting in his office, reviewing reports from the foundation. "So, what are your impressions?" Henry asked, looking up from his papers. Andrew clenched his fists and admitted, "I was wrong. I didn't understand what these people go through. I thought I could judge them by their appearance." "And now?" Henry asked, his gaze piercing. "Now I know that every person deserves respect, no matter their clothes, age, or status." Henry nodded, smiling slightly. "You've taken the first step. Remember, the world changes not through words, but through actions." The final week flew by. Andrew worked tirelessly, talked with people, and even helped the foundation organize an event for the elderly. By the end of the month, he stood before Henry feeling like a different person. "Thank you for the lesson, Mr. Matthews. I'll try to live differently." "Convince me with your actions," Henry replied warmly, shaking his hand. Andrew returned to the restaurant, but he was no longer the same. He became more attentive to people, to customers, and to his colleagues. A month later, he helped organize a charity dinner on behalf of the restaurant in support of Henry's foundation. At the event, Henry took the stage and said, "A person's true character is revealed through their actions, and sometimes, to see the world for what it truly is, you need to change the way you look at it." The room erupted in applause. Andrew looked at Henry and realized that this elderly man hadn't just given him a second chance. He had given him a new life.